Now, there is a very, very core, basic, universal thing that I've noticed about being a human being. It's the same thing that a lot of people have noticed, and that is that the truest and absolute most core parts of ourselves, so true that we call it the self, the universal self, those parts of us can never be known. Most of what we truly are as human beings are things that can never become an object of our minds. What we see, what we're able to pay attention to, what we're able to understand and think about is the very fine and thin area that our attention can occupy. But the truest self of a human being is unknowable. The moment you are able to think of something about yourself, once it's something that can become an object of thinking, it's no longer the truest part of you, part of me, part of everyone. It is the slate, it is the canvas, it is awareness itself. And this universe is a binary affair. It is zeros and ones, but between 0 and 1, there is just so much spectrum. There is just so much room. Between the left and the right, there is so much that you could call it infinite. And there are so many different sets of zeros and ones. There's so many different sets of opposites that you could also call that infinite. And when you put those two together, the space between black and white and the full range of color, the space between 0 and 1, and all the sets of zeros and ones, then you have the multiplicity that there is, the multiplicity of everything that's come to be that exists right now, including human beings. But this is the very basic. This is the essence of what so many people have been trying to say for so long. And people will continue to try to say it because it's the thing that unburdens us in our life. It's the thing that people sometimes become aware of and then start trying to do their best to put it into words, but in perfect irony, you cannot put it into words. You simply cannot describe it, just as it cannot become an object of thought. Anything that can be said, anything that can be thought, is immediately not it. When I speak, when we speak, there is audible sound because there is the vibration, and the vibration consists of on and off, a crest and a trough, an up and a down. But the very reality, the very immediate proximity, the very zone, the very facilitating factor for sound to exist is what we are at our most basic level. And this isn't something that one can think about, but it is a reality to be experienced. It is something that a person can see. And people do see it, and it changes them forever. It changes them forever. It totally rewrites how their brain works. And that happened to me when I was 26, and for some people it's like a drug. They want to get back to that state, you know, that place when this first dawned on them and they first saw it. It's not just nothing and something. It is the synergy of those two things and the backdrop that it creates. It's not just emptiness, and it's not just form. And that's the thing. When we try to look at stuff, when we try to examine this universe, we never actually find stuff. We never actually get to the point to where we find the quote-unquote matter. It's not there. It is simply not there. And this is one of those things that I'm glad that we have the advantage of science that has come as far as it has, because people have been saying this for a long time, far before we ever had a really good look at it. When you look closer and closer and you zoom in more and more and more, you keep finding more emptiness, and you never actually get to a material. You just keep finding ever smaller, interrelated, bound together arrangements, shapes that are of like constitution and are bound by likeness. But you never, ever get to anything. Solidness, this desk that I'm sitting at, is hard because it's moving so fast. Its basic makeup is moving so fast that it feels solid. And yes, of course, for the sake of conveying ideas and thoughts and conveying what language is able to convey and what you're able to verify, you could come here and of course touch the desk and feel that it's hard, that there is definitely something there. But there is no actual stuff, so to speak. And we thought that there was for a time. We thought that when we looked down at clay or anything, that we would find something, that we would find something concrete. But when you zoom in on this stuff and really look at it, you don't even know what it is until you zoom back out and look at it as a whole, and then within its context. This universe, what it is, what we see, and what our eyes and our senses pick out, is a matter. It's a matter of scale. It's a matter of magnification. In the same way that you could theoretically take a craft out of our solar system and go further and further and further away until the solar system is the size of something very, very tiny, and all those fine details of Earth are gone. but you know it's there. And now you need a very, very strong telescope to look at it from, let's say, millions of miles away. And you zoom in, you zoom in, you zoom in, and you see people down there. And then you see detail again. And that's one level of magnification, but if you take those people and those places and those things that those people are involved with and zoom in further, it turns into nothing again. It turns into something that's not quite recognizable, yet at the same time completely familiar. And that's the ultimate irony. That's the cosmic joke of this universe and being a human being. It's that when we are born, we are equipped with everything that we need to comprehend our truest self. We don't necessarily need information to comprehend that. In fact, information can sometimes drive our attention in a direction that's too specific and sort of corners your attention in a single spot. And then a person has a tendency to take that single spot and expand it and lay it over everything and try to use that as a sort of universal blanket and covering to explain everything by expanding this one little area. And I've done that myself many times. But the self is what they call the oceanic experience. And like I said, sometimes it happens on accident, and sometimes it happens on purpose, and sometimes not at all. It is the thing that the attention cannot grab. It is the thing that happens when the attention is turned from a sharp point to just a floodlight. That's why I like that term, floodlight awareness. And it's strange. We go through life looking for answers. We go through life looking for something. And it's interesting how we observe ourselves. We surprise ourselves. We describe our behavior in terms of things that we don't quite do, things that we watch ourselves do. We almost talk as if we are an observer of ourselves and we don't quite know what we're going to do or what we're going to say. And when we describe ourselves, we describe ourselves in terms of the patterns that we've noticed of ourselves. And that's why things like discipline is so hard for people. And I completely understand that. That's why things like interest are so mysterious. And from cradle to the grave, we will always, always, always remain a mystery to ourselves. We will know ourselves on one hand and be a complete mystery on the other. We will have forgotten anything, most things that have happened to us. We will have never thought of what we truly are. And all the thoughts that we will have had would have definitely been us. But it will have been the us that we noticed about ourselves, that we observed along the way. And it's good that we forget. I mean, imagine if we remembered everything. Everything. I get why it's this way, because it is a balance. It's a balance between those two poles of each binary that just includes so much. It sounds reductive to say something as vast as this universe and as vast as human beings and everything else is black and white and binary, but it truly is. And I can't say enough how much is contained between each pole. And with quantum physics as it goes, in time it's going to continue to verify what people have been saying this entire time, because we can understand intuitively what is inevitably discovered through investigation. We can love before we ever prove it. We can despise before we ever show it. And we get hungry before we eat. I remember when I first heard about The Secret. You remember that? That little phase that society had? And the basic premise is, if you think it, it will happen. And it says that your mind doesn't distinguish between good and bad thoughts. It just goes with whatever you're thinking about. But of course, that's not a revelation really, because it's akin to the idea that when you feel hungry, you eat. You feel hungry and you start thinking of food and you go get that food. It's that basic situation expanded to more complicated things. When you get hungry, you don't just not eat. You don't just sit there worrying about eating, unless, you can't access food. But if you have access to food, you don't sit there pondering food unless you're thinking about what you want to make. But even that doesn't last very long, because when you're thinking about what you want to make, you're listening to what your body is telling you it wants. We call it craving. But yeah, our body is telling us exactly what we need. And we listen to it. Very rarely do we eat what we don't want. Do we choose something that we aren't craving? Usually if we're craving something, we'll go pretty great lengths to see that through. And we'll make up these fantastic, beautiful plates, just amazing steak. We'll leave the house, go among other people, walk around a store, spend a couple hours if we have to, buying what we need to get that craving. And it's interesting, there are some things that can become an object of our thinking, but it's only in retrospect. We observe what we've done, and we observe what is said about what we've done, and bring those two things together and come up with some idea about what we are, who we are. There's that end of the bargain, and then there is just what you experience, what your experience feels like. And a great bit of the human game, a great bit of the human situation, the social condition is working out how other people have interpreted what you've done and how you interpret what other people have done, and squaring those two things up. There's a thing called sincerity, and we like that. We like that because when we're looking at it, when we're seeing it in front of our eyes, as it's occurring, we feel a sense that we like that we want more of that. It almost has a gravity, a charge that drives you in because what you're witnessing is a person bleeding out and spilling out the combined sum of their being through words, through actions. Very raw. You can see and understand and comprehend a person when they're being sincere. You can trust them, obviously. And we're so good at noticing that. We're so good at noticing when somebody isn't being sincere. And we don't like that. We don't like that because we know that there is an incongruency between how you're interpreting them and how they're interpreting themselves, how they view what they're saying and doing and how that looks. There's something off. And a person doesn't like to be told that they're fake. And what do you mean by that when you're fake? Well, I think we all know exactly what that means. I honestly don't even really have to describe it, but it's obvious what that is. And a person isn't trying to be fake or insincere. Before a person is able to be sincere, they try out several different ways of being. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, there were kids who, within one school year, would, they'd be like a surfer kind of kid at the beginning of the year, and then they'd be like a country kind of kid with just completely different wardrobes and ways of talking and outfits, and they'd be kind of like a rapper type. And I'd see these people just going through these different, almost tests to see how people interpret it, and they see how it feels when they're broadcasting that. Does that feel congruent? Does that match the inside with the outside? And that's what people spend a great deal of the beginning of their life doing. And often it's not even intentional. Most people just fit in. Most people, even if they don't want to fit in. And in great irony, there are people who don't care so much about fitting in. And by not caring so much about whether or not they fit in, but at the same time caring about people that they like, they seem to be able to always be just fine, Irony is a huge part of human life. It's ironic that people who aren't so concerned or afraid of death live so long. It's ironic how people who think and think and think and who really want control lose control. It's the people who couldn't give a single fuck about control who are in full control. It's the people who don't really set out to be funny, who can just naturally say funny things. And if you do set out to be funny, it takes a lot of practice to look like you're not trying. And why take that route? That's the hard route. The easy route is to settle into yourself. It's to watch. Watch how people interpret you. Watch what people do, and watch how you interpret people. There is just an infinite wealth of information. Golden information going on all the time. And you just have to sit back and nestle into yourself and watch. And what does it feel like when you're saying certain words? Certain words, certain ways of talking just won't feel right to you. It just won't. Certain ways of talking will feel completely natural to you. For some people, singing is the most right they can ever feel. Singing, of all things. And for most people, singing is the most out of place possible thing that could be happening, which is reflected by their terrible voice. And yes, you're partially born a good singer, but you're also made a good singer as well. And that just is another part, another facet. The fact that we have this thing called the human being, and there's billions of us, and there's been billions in the past, and there will be billions more. But there will never be two identical human beings. Even identical twins are not identical. Within that simple framework, male, female, binary, there's all these personalities. None. There will be no two that feel the same. Ever. There will never be two blades of grass that are identical. But if you stand back and look at a yard, they all look the same when they're collected together. But none of them are identical. It just depends on how closely you want to look at it. There are no two identical trees, but there are forests upon forests. There are no two identical grains of sand. There's never been two gusts of wind that are exact. Every single second that passes is brand new. Every single bit of this conduit as it moves is fresh. Right now, it's alive. It's surging in all directions, through you and out of you. And you, as a person, are a crystallized, dense, condensed version of all there is. You are all there is, looking at itself. And I say that because, not out of a theoretical idea, I can tell. I can tell. And many people can tell as well. And once you see that, it just jumps you forward with everything. You can relax, you know. You don't have to hold on so tight. And at the same time, you can hold on very, very tightly to things. It is the paradox. It is to care and not care. It's to be serious and unserious. It is that clean line between all opposites. That is the point. That is what we are. And that line it can be imagined, but it doesn't really exist. It's in flux. It's moving back and forth. It's not always split down the middle. It's ever changing. But look, wherever you're at now, look around. Look around you right now. Be aware that your senses and what's being sensed are one process. You and your surroundings are a single process. You are what's happening in that location where you are. And the thoughts, that sliver that is able to pull memories out and hold them up against the present to make interpretations and inferences about what's happening. is that plus the entire slate in which it rests. There's that funny thing, that funny situation where people have thought that they are dreaming. This is their dream, their world, and everybody else is but a character, part of the dream. And that, just by being able to think about it and talk about it how I am now, means that it isn't the truest self. It is not the true state of things. It's such a common, simple, and easy thought, and it's a feeling. It's a feeling of thought. It's a thought that's occurred to people. But just by virtue of that, it takes it out of the lineup as the possibility of being the truth. That takes it out of the running. You notice how I've said all these words so far, but I haven't actually said the thing. But I've said a bunch of words that skitter right over it. That just kind of, I can see it. It's like a, it's like a shape. And it skitters around it, and sometimes the words go right through it, but they never land. And you can write book after book after book, give lecture after lecture, just like Alan Watts, like Jesus, like Buddha, and thousands of other people who will never actually say the thing because you can't. It's akin to describing the sun to somebody who was born blind. Somebody who doesn't know what a circle is. Doesn't have any idea what the color orange is or red. The only way to truly know the sun is to see it. You cannot describe it. You cannot adequately use words or even descriptions of any kind. You might be able to make a song that feels like the sun, but you will never truly grab exactly what that sun is through any other means but experiencing it. And that's how this thing is, because it is the sun, and it's earth, and it's every person, and it's everything in between, together all at once, all the time, eternally. It's the same sort of thing as completely indescribable, yet every word is it. It is every word, but none of the words grab it. And we've come up with some words that are a decent summation, but even these words mean different things to different people. Like you use the word God. That means so many different things. It's as good as we've done so far. But God speaks of something specific, of a specific theology. And the Bible is a very thick book. And the Bible doesn't really get too esoteric. You notice the Bible is a series of stories. It is not a philosophical discourse. The philosophical discourse is of the Bible, of the stories. But the Bible makes no bones about it. It's a very specific story. And in my opinion, if you've ever read it, it is the greatest story ever told. I cannot conceive a more grand story than the architect of this universe making human beings, watching the human beings rebel, and then having to start over because the rebellion becomes so bad and just so unsalvageable, he floods the entire planet. and then comes down in the form of one of those humans and sacrifices himself for all of them so that they may have another chance and have a clean slate. I mean, that is the most unbelievable story. I mean, wow. Especially the way it happened. I mean, Jesus didn't have any clue what he was until his 30s. And when he was baptized, it became clear. His baptism happened to, at the same time, make him understand and know exactly who he was. And if you think about it, hypothetically, if the God did come to earth, that's exactly how it would happen. You wouldn't be a child, a baby God. You wouldn't be a teenage God. You wouldn't just come out of your mother as God, knowing all along. Of course, you wouldn't know at first, and you would know later. Of course, that's how it would happen. And then, nobody believed him. Of course. If I said I was God, nobody would believe me either. And it's a perfectly reasonable thing to not believe somebody. Because a lot of people have said that, to be honest. But so he goes around doing miracles, healing people, turning water into wine. You know all the stories. And people start to see that, and they're like, okay, well, maybe this dude, wow, I've never seen that. He just brought somebody back from the dead. I mean, if that's not God, I don't know who is. Like, yeah, he did a lot of miracles like that just blew people's tits off. But after he knew he was God, he knew what was going to happen. He knew he was going to die. He knew he was going to sacrifice himself, and he knew why. He knew why he existed from that point forward. He knew he existed to die. And he knew that his death and the manner in which he was to die was the only way to make it to where his name permeated through the ages with such a story and such a sacrifice that nobody would ever forget it. And nobody has so far. Look at, it's 2024. It's been 2,024 years, and I'm talking about it like it happened yesterday. This dude was born during the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was a place that used crucifixion as a common practice. And the cross was to be the symbol. That was the time. And it happened exactly as the books that came earlier said it would, which is even more strange, down to the finest detail. And while he was on that cross, he had, with his human nervous system, experienced the suffering and the sin and the pain of every human being who has existed and who will exist. Sacrificed himself. Me personally, I sacrifice for people I only really, really care about. I would sacrifice for people if they were in danger or something, but for everybody to care that much about humanity, really, to come down from heaven in the form of a man and endure the pain of all of humankind so that they may be forgiven for rebelling and for any future rebellion and for that tendency to hate and for what people do to each other. I mean, damn, dude. That's fucking crazy. And you can take it a step further. There is that spot within us that cannot be known. It cannot be an object of the mind, but it is the mind and all of its activity. That is the place where God dwells. It is the silent witness that is a core building block to what a human being is, with the same sort of sense, logic, and reasoning as that which created us. And it's empty, and it always will be empty, because it is so vast that our entire lives are a sliver, a very, very small sliver on that slate. It's deep and vast and beautiful. And every human being has access to that. Everybody does. And it's not theoretical. Now, truly, the only way to see anything close to that, ironically, again, is by not thinking. Thinking is the surest way and the quickest way away from the truth. The truth can only make itself available when the screen of thought and interpretation subsides. Because the screen of thought and interpretation is just that. And that screen encompasses the vast majority of everything of how we think and live and behave in our entire lifetime. So, to see the truth, you have to figure out how to not think. Because we're always thinking. This is the one thing you cannot think your way into. It's the one thing that thinking is the exact opposite of the key.